In the culture wars, there are no winners, just podcasters. Only a few are willing to risk their lives in the face of some of the dumbest ideas to have ever captured human civilization. Every week, we, Megan Daum and Sarah Hayter, humbly accept this mission to bring you conversations that are equal parts stunning, brave, and all hustle without the grift. Welcome to a special place in hell. I don't know. We'll unpack that. Sarah, we have a special guest in hell.
I see.
Today.
Yes.
Wilfred Reilly. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Welcome to hell. You are super interesting. I've been wanting to talk with you for a while, as has Sarah. But when I saw you in the Matt Walsh film, Am I a Racist? I knew it was time to get you on this podcast.
Great. Well, good to be on it.
Yeah, this is what being a Hollywood star gets you, this kind of gig. So you're a political scientist. You're a professor at Kentucky State. Presumably you're still a professor there. You've written several books, most recently Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. We want to talk about that. In 2019, you published a book about hate crime hoaxes, which I believe came out right around the same time as the Jussie Smollett hoax. Was it like the same week or month or something?
Yeah. So getting into that was actually the hip hop MC Lil Wayne once actually gave a really intelligent speech about how to get rich. I think it was at the University of Houston. And he said, well, anyone can become upper middle class. Like you go to the army, you get out, you go to dental school, anyone can do it. It's actually very true. I've played it for my students. But to get very successful, there's a huge element of luck. So he was talking about some things he'd done, like he had a hit single early on and so on. And then he said, well, one of the things that was probably lucky for me is that my stepfather's Birdman, who owns Cash Money Records. And I remember the first time I listened to it, I just started cracking up like, yeah, that might have played a little bit of a role. You know, you have a recording studio in your basement. But with me, it was the same thing. Like the first book that I wrote, A Hate Crime Hoax, came out with Regnery. It's a popular press book, but it's actually fairly academic in structure. Like it looks at all of these very high profile hate incidents like Jussie Smollett, but also Yasmin Saweed, the UVA, Rolling Stone, rape hoax. Just all of this stuff, a lot of them fairly touchy. Bowling Green, the woman who claimed she was followed by Trump-supporting students who were throwing rocks at her and I think threatening to urinate her, like on her. Like
that sounds totally plausible. Hold on a second. Yeah. Are you sure that's a hoax?
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that happens all the time. You go over
the row. I mean, it almost happened to me the other day, but I fought back. Okay, sorry, keep going.
You resisted. That's right. You kept your sandwich until the end and all that. But no, but I mean, like none of the incidents, there were about 409 discussed in the book. None of them turned out to be real. Obviously, the majority of assault or SA claims are real, but this was 15% of the cases in that range or whatever we worked it out to be. And so I started asking, why did this incredibly large proportion of these incidents turn out to be fakes? Like what kind of value are we attaching to victimization in our society? So on. It's a legitimate academic question. But a couple of days after the book had come out, I was doing like C-SPAN, book TV at 3 a.m. and this kind of thing. As one does. I was like an assistant professor at the time. But Jussie Smollett, like in my old neighborhood in Chicago, made up his story and the whole thing started going hyper viral. And like a couple of weeks into the print run of the book, it was revealed the story was a fake. So that was the thing that really made anyone pay attention to the book. I actually sent Jussie Smollett a signed copy of the book with some signature, like, thanks for building my house, bro.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he got it or not, but that definitely, shone some light on my later writings. Which,
wow. Okay, well, I want to talk more about the Jussie Smollett hoax, so we'll kind of circle back to that. But let's start with your recent star turn in Am I a Racist? How did you wind up in that film?
Well,
you're a talking head, by the way. You're not one of the people. You're not a DEI consultant. You appear as an anti-DEI consultant.
Yeah, well, now that's interesting in that myself and two friends, Brooks Crenshaw and Kevin Jackson, who used to work for Fox, have actually had a fair amount of business experience. And we're thinking about setting up an anti-DEI consulting company where you can bring in this diverse group of businessmen and women into your business and learn how you can not do DEI without getting sued. And we've pitched it to a couple corporate clients, and the reaction is just sort of like, my God, this is great.
Yes.
This is pay
You just call
$200,000
it.
on a retainer or whatever. It'd save years of just time waste.
Yeah. Call it CYA. That's it. Just
That's
cover your
actually,
ass.
that's actually not a bad
You
idea.
can
We'd have
have
to
it. CYA Associates.
see it's. I got something out of this
Okay. Well,
call
it's
other than just
been
the
great
charm
having
of
you.
yeah. No,
Thanks.
we're done. But no, the that actually we'd have to think of some acronym, but everyone would get it. CYAA Associates or whatever. But that's kind of the role in which I was called. Like I do some side consulting. I speak pretty often at colleges or with corporate clients. And these people called me from what was obviously a Daily Wire number. Like it was Nashville and it was in their building and asked if I wanted to work. The original, they weren't quite upfront. It was like, do you want to work on a documentary about DEI and the importance of good race relations? It was very, if you guys are churchgoers, very much that sort of not quite lying. Like you could tell it to your priest or your rabbi. And I was like tracing the number and like, okay, Ben Shapiro's office is right down the hall. Like, sure, yeah, I'll come up. And I gave them a figure and they said, okay. And they brought me in. And when I came there, it was, again, I pretty much knew what it was. I'd gotten some tips from friends. But I walk into the room and it's just Matt Walsh in a wig. And I mean, like, I know who Matt Walsh is. He follows me on Twitter. And at that point, it was just kind of like, bro, what's going on? So there's a conversation before they start filming. And then we both just sort of played our role during the bit. He had, as one final comment for me, he had gone through the training. Like he had actually done the work.
Yes.
So he'd gone through like the 9 stages of DEI online Canvas or whatever training. He can give sessions on like exploring your femininity, blackness and what it means. So that's a skill he has.
Okay, well, this is such an interesting inside view into how that movie was made because I'm surprised they had to put up a front to get you to be in the film. I mean, presumably you would be a friendly voice, like you would be amenable to this kind of thing. So why do you think they were so covert about it with you?
Well, in all honesty, with me, they weren't incredibly covert. I mean, they said we're filming this movie. It's located here in Nashville. I think by the end of the first call, I was teasing them a little bit. Like I was fairly aware of what it was. So there wasn't a massive cloak and dagger sort of thing. But I mean, I will say there might even be some legal reasons everyone would be read the same rap as the phrase that comes to mind. But they had set up an entire company that was producing this movie that was distinct from the Daily Wire. It was Blended Colors or something. I'm sure I got that wrong. But they had a warehouse in Nashville, in the city that we ended up going to, that they'd reserved space in this building that was full of all these other artists. I remember there was an organic smoothie shop there and a feminist dressmaker and all these sort of just people. There was one of those hacker type guys that'll fix your computer. And then there are a couple of big rooms where they were doing filming. So, I mean, I think they'd just gotten used to, like, we're going to pitch this as something very different from DW, and we're going to kind of method act that out. So when we're pitching Robin DiAngelo, we're not going to say anything that might reveal this is Matt Walsh, Candace Owens was with them at the time, that kind of project.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. Well, so what did you think of the film? Presumably you've seen it.
I thought it was good. I mean, as an honest review for people I'm friendly with that have seen my comments on it before, I'd give it about an A-. I think it hit. It was solid. The thing with something like that, like Borat is at the classic comparator, is that it's hard to put together like a through line. So, I mean, the question would be, what's the story? Is it Walsh getting his DEI certification and then going to teach others to do the work? And that was sort of pastiched in there. I mean, most of the movie was just these people. And this is the same thing with What is a Woman? The theme is these people doing this ridiculous horseshit. Like these people that if you're in business, you see charging $15,000 an hour. When you ask them actual questions, have no idea what they're doing. So, I mean, that I thought was really well done. Core storyline's hard with a movie like that, but I thought it was good.
So I don't want to get too derailed on the film itself because I want to talk about you. But like, the money shot, so to speak, is when Robin DiAngelo opens up her purse and hands over $30 to Ben, the black producer. Were you surprised that they got her to do that?
No, on 2 levels. One, I think a lot of those people, I don't know Dr. DiAngelo in person. She could be a perfectly charming person, but one, I think a lot of those people are idiots. I've sparred with Ibram Kendi a few times online. He is a nice guy. I wish him recovery. He's dealing with cancer right now. But like, he'll just drop things in passing. Like, I got a 10/20 on the SAT, and that means intelligence tests don't mean anything. And I just keep looking at him like, bro, that's one of two things it could mean. So I'm not too surprised that some of these folks got tricked. If you ever talk to the people that are responsible for a lot of the leading ideas of the day, now that genetic hereditarianism, Tom Sowell style culturalism, actual feminism, like any of the 10 paradigms I enjoy arguing with people from, now that a lot of those are not very prevalent in the academy, the quality of what you're actually seeing is pretty low. I mean, so if you read Kendi, D'Angelo, Rich Delgado, Jen Stefanchik, Gloria Anzaldúa, any of these people, you often get the impression that this is just sort of a talented master student. Like it's not at all shocking to me that these, non-Rudyard Kipling citizens were bamboozled. Like someone who gives you a $15,000 check and is using words you're not necessarily all that familiar with from the other side of the political spectrum. You get hustled for 2 hours and you make a couple mistakes and you leave. I'm sure I've said stupid things in interviews. It's just generally I'll go into an interview with either a very professional kind of setting, like, okay, there's this guy from the Times and you can record that sort of thing, or it's with an allied group. I mean, if someone's just like, I'll give you $20,000 to come to this suspicious warehouse and answer 2 hours full of questions, I'd really want to, I'd put one of my friends from the legal days on it. I'd want to see what that was.
Really? I would just immediately go. Sarah, you would, right? I mean, if somebody invited us to a warehouse for $20,000, like, I'd be like, I'd say 10. Interview. I would be like, how about 10? I would do it for 5.
Yeah, the important thing is that it's in the warehouse. It's because that's so non-sketch and productive sounding.
No.
But I think there's one other point there. I don't think all these people are brilliant, but also I do think you have to recognize, I'm sure you guys do, that there's like this human instinct to not be an asshole. So when I watched Borat, and even to a lesser extent when I watched this movie, there's sometimes kind of a wince element to it. Because you can make people say most things. Like there's a scene in Borat where the guy says, in my country, we have a traditional song. And if you've ever done any stuff about like how to hustle, you do this in stages. Are you going to sing along with me? Yes. You won't make me feel bad, right? Yes. This is not something you have to agree with as an American. Yes. And a lot of that's cut out of the final product. Okay. This song is called Throw the Jew Down the Well. And in the movie, he actually gets all these people to sing in these Western based voices. Throw the Jew down the well. And there are people like stamping their feet. I actually feel kind of bad for those people. Some of them lost jobs because of that song. Because you understand how the setup works. And there was a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, I felt that way with Colbert too, even though I enjoyed, at his best, I really enjoyed him. But those interviews, they're predatory in a way. Not everyone can do it. But these people, they kind of set themselves up. I mean, when we had Sarah and Regina on, they didn't even. It wasn't a setup. We thought they would look us up and they would know exactly who we were. And when they said yes, we were both so shocked. Like, how could they possibly
we were waiting for them to cancel. I mean, we were like, wait, they're like, they're not going to come on. There's no way they're going to, and then there they were.
And then they're there. And then it became clear within, just a few minutes of like the start of it that they had no idea that they were like meeting somebody who just a party that didn't agree with them and their basic premises. So it was kind of an inadvertent setup on our end. But it was a good time. Definitely.
Yeah. I think that kind of gets more into people being dumb with another element there of just, it's not even dumb so much as unaware. So there are actually quite a few well done studies in psychology that you guys may well have read, but where they look at conservatives and liberals, and they find that conservatives tend to be passionate about their beliefs, military dominance or abortion or whatever it is, but are well aware of the positions on the other side. It's my body, etc., and can often debate them. Leftists are very often not familiar with the core conservative arguments. So I noticed that when I argue and someone calls me a racist from the left on social media or at a formal debate, I know that I'm going to win because I am not only not a racist. I very famously debated the founder of the dissident right once, honors about even, but I hate that stuff. But I'm also black. Like I'm a black and part native, like bald. Like it's just not going to work. So the claim comes from a place of deep ignorance. Like, oh, you must be one of those Caucasian upper class bigots that hates immigrants, women, go through a list of things. That's very wrong. And I think Rao and Jackson probably just couldn't conceptualize that there's a whole world of heterodox media that hundreds of thousands of people watch where people think they're idiots. And that actually, just very briefly, I think that's one reason why the Matt Walsh thing is less cringe than Borat. He is actually, quote unquote, punching up. Like all of those people have at least the same platform that Walsh does, like Robin DiAngelo. They're millionaires. They are some of the best known consultants in the country. So if you don't research, if you don't find out the company doesn't exist, which took me 30 seconds, before you put that in your Rolodex, then you kind of deserve to get hustled. It's very different from taking some Texas farmer and making him look like a racist, in my opinion.
Yeah. They also had a publicist, by the way, who, I mean, I just went through the book publicist and she said, okay, I'll run it by them. And they all agreed. And I mean, frankly, with them, I get the sense they don't actually get that many media hits. They don't get that many gigs. So my suspicion is that the publicist actually wanted them to do anything. And maybe she didn't really let on what it was, or she just kind of left it in their court. And there they were. So, yeah. Well, so Wilfred, tell us about your background. You're from Chicago originally? How did you grow up, and how did your thoughts about race and all of this stuff evolve?
I've actually had a really interesting life. Like, I mean, so yeah, I'm from Chicago. My mom is a Chicago ward, which is like an upper class Black family. But she's, as far as I can tell, largely estranged from the family. I'm friendly with some of them now. My dad was a white guy who is from a very different social position, and in fact is from, I think, Ireland. He's from the British Isles, and they separated about a year after I was born. But I mean, I grew up in Chicago, and my mom has a master's degree. My mom went to Roosevelt, pretty well educated, which is great for me as a kid. Like, we had all these books sitting around the house full of calligraphy and ancient weaponry and so on, which I really enjoyed. But she was an inner city school teacher, and they don't make a lot of money. So I basically lived in the hood areas where she taught to some extent. Like in Chicago, that was just the pre-gentrification Wicker Park neighborhood. It was kind of artsy. It was jokingly nicknamed Needle Park at the time. I liked it. A lot of purple-haired skateboarders and oi punks and so on at this time. Very urban. Outside of New York, probably the max for that in the USA, actually. That's the current WP Bucktown area in Chicago today, where you can easily buy a $200 messenger bag and so on. Looks a little different. But from there, we moved to the east side of nearby Aurora, which is the second largest city in Illinois.
Oh,
and
Wayne's World. Are they from Aurora?
Well, Wayne's World is actually Aurora. The actual side of Aurora that they're supposed to be from, the east side of Aurora, is actually a working class Latino and Eastern European, some Blacks area. Okay. So there aren't a lot of people sitting around saying totally nude and eating dozens of donuts. Like, people really actually dislike that movie, which is kind of funny.
Oh, okay. But, sorry, I didn't mean to get off.
That's cool. I'm not like offended. I actually did jokingly throw up a neighborhood sign, but I'm not like gonna like fight somebody about the honor of Aurora at this point in my life. But but no, I mean, it was that was another area where she taught. She was a substitute and later a teacher at East Aurora High School, District 131, which is where I went. I also went to most of these schools with a brief stretch in Catholic school, and it was enjoyable. I was considered kind of a nerdy kid because I was literate. Like, I just sort of knew shit. I had kind of a basic upper middle class education, but I mean, a lot of these were pretty bad schools. Like, East Aurora was at the time almost the school you'd see in movies, like not hyper ghetto, but just very large, very diverse, like white kid with a skateboard who's drunk, like sleeping at a desk, and like Black kid who came up from the South at the desk next to him, and like Latino kid from Oaxaca next to him. Like, people reading newspapers in the back of the room or playing cards sometimes. I was in our honors program after the first year, so I skipped out of some of this. And the school has since significantly improved. But anyway, just working class childhood. I played sports as well. No really crazy hero stories. Like, my best sport actually 50 pounds ago was middle distance running. I was on our varsity cross country team for 3 years. Normal amount of fairly happy dating relationships, which kids seem to be falling away from now.
Yeah.
Some like unresolved mental trauma from just like being in a divorced family living in the hood. So, I mean, like, I got in a fair amount of fights, and so I'm just a normal guy. I graduated from, and I think that was part of my transition in life. Like, I graduated from East Aurora High School, And I remember that because my mom had encouraged me to apply for all of these elite national scholarships, when I graduated, I got something like $1 million in potential scholarship aid. And it was actually sort of a joke at the ceremony where they announced all these scholarships for people, because people are just like, this reasonably popular dorky athlete keeps getting these things announced for like Princeton, like these places that I really wasn't financially going to be going to. And then, the majority of people that I was close friends with went to community college or went to war. I mean, this is 99, 2000. This is just before we started the war in Iraq. By 2001, when I was beginning school, like friends of mine were actually in the military. And by the end of that year, November, December, we're heading over there. So, and from that point forward, I guess there's kind of a trajectory divergence. Like I went to college, I graduated from Southern Illinois University in 3 years. That was very fun.
My parents went there. Both of my parents went to Southern Illinois University.
So Lukey's what? This was Southern Illinois, both in that generation and in mine, was very consistently one of the top 20 party schools in the country. And that's kind of what it was known for. Like it was like top 100 in academics. It wasn't a bad school.
Right.
But I mean, it was very much a social, enjoyable environment. And it also was very non-Greek dominated. It wasn't the stereotypical kind of college culture. There was sort of a local hip hop scene, almost redneck scene. There's a strip full of bars that people would sit around outside arguing. So I enjoyed it there, graduated. And then I guess the next step up went to law school. And this was at the University of Illinois. When I got to Illinois, I was, I think, 20, because I'd gotten out of high school a bit ahead of my grade. And I used to make snarky jokes about this, like because I could read since I was in the Chicago and Aurora public schools, but I just did. I graduated from undergrad in 3 years. So I started law school when I was like 20. And I was going to school with all these very serious, much older people. Like U of I and Michigan are traditionally the schools like just below the Ivies. So most of these people wanted to work for Jenner and Block in Chicago and so on. And I did reasonably well. But again, there was kind of a fast transition process there. I had no idea what most of them were talking about most of the time for about the first year and a half in terms of all of these life goals, what golden handcuffs meant and so on. I still had a skateboard when I got there. So anyway, I graduated from there, and this saga sort of continued. I had been planning on going into the law, and it's almost sitcom level in terms of what that probably would have been like. I was 22. My partner at the time was not significantly more mature, let's say. And the jobs I was getting offered were pretty good. I mean, it probably didn't hurt that I was, an in-state Black person who on my mother's side was probably a legacy for a number of Chicago businesses and so forth. And as I was interviewing, I was basically offered a chance to go back to grad school at Southern Illinois. At this time, they were recruiting more minorities, more males, actually, more members of different groups to get into either prep school or academic teaching. So I was offered what's called a DFI, Diversifying the Faculty of Illinois Fellowship, blah, blah, blah. I went back down there. But anyway, I went to grad school. While I was in grad school, my mom got really sick. So I ended up coming back to Chicago and kind of continuing the process of slow maturation for a while. Like I had all these crazy jobs for about 6 years. I worked as one of the field managers for a canvas organization. So we would travel around the city and later parts of the country, sort of freedom riding. Our main cause was gay rights. So we would go to hostile locations and ask people, literally, you got a minute for gay marriage? And the reactions were varied. I mean, they included a decent amount of violence and also people giving us money, people asking us to be personally intimate or go to parties with them. And this just went on.
Yeah, I guess do you have a minute for gay rights could mean any number of things if you're standing outside a supermarket. Okay.
One of my friends who happened to be a bisexual woman would actually ask, hey, got a minute for gay love? And the responses to her were off the charts ridiculous. I was a bit more sedate, but I did that for a couple of years. I worked in one of those classic sales floor, trading floor, bullpen jobs. I worked for Marcus Evans. I think it was the North American headquarters of a British company. This is on Michigan Avenue, just off LaSalle Street. So by this point, I was wearing a suit. I was doing pretty well financially. Did a couple other things. And anyway, finally graduated, got my PhD. And by this point, I'm like 30. 28 or 29. And I just started applying for academic jobs. I also traveled a fair amount during this period. I went to Latin America, didn't really live there, but was there for a period of months, kind of traveling around. Still have some friends there now. But at the getting the degree was kind of the end of that period. I actually wanted to teach. I could have stayed with any of the companies I'd worked with probably for a while, but I liked the idea of, I enjoyed teaching. So I applied to different places. I got interviewed by a couple with state in the name, which is pretty good outside of a few of the very top academic schools. And I ended up going to Kentucky State, which is a historically black college in Appalachia.
Oh.
And I actually thought that would be an interesting place to teach, and a place where I could actually help people go to law school, for example, like as I had. And that turned out to be the case. So I've been here for about 8 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten some asks to move recently as I guess I've become more prominent, but so far no bite. So that's the actually really kind of mundane that story down from the normal offline version. But yeah, like I had a reasonably interesting life, and that's part of it.
So that's so interesting. So what was this sort of climate like around discussions about race when you got there? Like, was there, I mean, so 8 years ago, I'm thinking, like, were we still sort of at, like, you know, in the post-Obama, like, let's be post-racial moment, or were they starting to get a little more
2015
CRT-ish?
So one of my experiences in life has been that race relations have progressively gotten worse. And I'll try to avoid another like 7-minute ramble on this, but just growing up as a kid, I think it's important that any younger viewers in the audience realize that in 1998 in Chicago, we didn't have segregation. I mean, this was the era of that one movie, Kids. If anything, the problem was sort of too much decadence for youth in the urban social scenes. So, I mean, my relationships, I guess, would almost all qualify as interracial because I'm interracial. I mean, one was with an African, I believe, Jamaican black woman. One was with an Irish American white woman in high school and into college. This was very standard. I mean, at East Aurora or in more middle-class Chicago schools that friends went to, I'd say it's probably a third to half of all the dating relationships. The marriages didn't turn to settle out that way, but everyone was just fairly acclimated. And there actually is a good deal of quantitative data that's on point about this. Pew keeps records of a poll question that asks people, pretty well-designed question, what their view of race relations is across a couple metrics. Every year, they've done that since the 70s. And in this kind of Jordan v. Bird era, the 1994 through 1999, 70% of whites and 65% of blacks thought race relations were good.
Yeah.
And they were. I mean, this is in the North, we desegregated in the 20s. So, of course, it's unfortunate that there were clubs, for example, that were, it was known that they admitted primarily, if not entirely, Anglo-Caucasians. There were similar clubs for blacks and Jews, by the way. There were some that did admit women. I mean, it's not ideal, but day-to-day enterprise life, like on the Chicago trains or playing pickup basketball or applying for jobs on a sales floor, was incredibly integrated to a greater degree than I see much of life as being now.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in the Louisville suburbs, not Idaho. Like, I think the two are pretty comparable. So that was the starting point. I think from there, we saw pretty much a stable trend line, or one going down slightly, until the middle of the Obama presidency, which is what you're talking about. And then we saw a dramatic plunge down. We saw another dip down, and that's measurable. So right now, the most recent article, when I cited this data, I believe it's 33% of whites and 30% of blacks think race relations are good. And you can tie that to social media. You can tie that to the kind of the gross video culture on both sides. Like, here's a video of a cop shooting an innocent black man. Well, here's a video of 4 black guys kicking a guy to death. You know, every now and then someone will throw in a video of Hispanic immigrants just to give them a chance. I mean, I think all of this has contributed to the worsening of the culture around race relations. So is the academic stuff as well, of course, critical theory. But yeah, race relations have gotten quite a bit worse since I was a kid. Do you guys agree with that, by the way?
I totally agree. So I'm 20 years older than Sarah. So I was going to ask, like, Sarah, do you remember a time when race relations were just sort of normal?
Yeah. I think when I was in, like, going through the K through 12 system, things were okay, and even in college, things were fine. And it wasn't. I think there was something about the Obama presidency. I don't know if it was him.
Yeah.
or it helped spark something, or it was him plus social media plus, a bunch of other factors. But that might have been the moment where things started to turn. But I was okay up until end of college, really. And then that was around then, I think around the end of the first Obama term, suddenly things felt different. There was just so much more racial hostility around, and like just the sense that things were not okay, even if they were, and I was kind of in the rationalist, like adjacent spheres. So I was like, look, things are actually fine. Like they might not seem okay, but we're actually on the up and up, and things are improving for everybody. But there's something about the perception that over time becomes a kind of a reality. And definitely my younger siblings, family members, they have a different experience than I do. I experience them as being much more, racially, I don't want to say exclusive, but like much more divided than I was, and much more conscious of their own, South Asian identity in a way that I was not. It was just kind of funny to us, like, oh, I'm this and you're that, and it's whatever. It's nothing. It's just like it's just like an interesting biographical fact about you, and not something so determinative.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, the one comment that I would add, like when you talk about perception versus reality, I think that's actually important. Because right now, what we're seeing is a series of hysterical overreactions in the American upper middle class that are driven by panic fear, but where there's no root cause for the fear. This is something that I've actually looked at for fairly serious consulting projects, for academic articles. I wanted to be absolutely sure of this before I started writing about it. But like the things people believe are just totally unreal.
Yeah.
For example, I think it was 2000. It was in 2020. It was when COVID first came out. Kex TC, the European consultancy, found out about 9 months in that the average upper middle class woman, at least that's who the people in their sample were, thought that 10% of the population had already died from COVID. So, I mean, 10% of the population would be 34 million people with illegal immigrants and so on worked in. The total death toll from the COVID pandemic over 3 years was 2 million, maybe. I think that
nobody's doing that math, I mean, it's like the people who think like, why doesn't Elon Musk just like take care of everyone's like whatever debt? They think that that's possible. Like it's they're not adding it all up. They're not doing that work.
I think that is fair to say.
So what are some other things that people grossly misunderstand?
Well, I think there are quite a few of these, honestly. Like most major statistical points, I'm going to be looking in for the side for like a minute or two while my computer charges, then we'll get back, I guess. But so I think a lot of major statistical points actually have this sort of problem. So Skeptic Research Center recently looked at the number of unarmed Black men that the average Black guy or white liberal thinks are killed annually by the police. And the average estimate, well, it wasn't the average estimate. Most people said either 10,000 or 1,000.
Yeah.
So it was, I think 30% of people said in a typical year, it's got to be about 1,000 unarmed Black men that are killed. This is just Black, just men, just unarmed. And another 14 to 15% said it's got to be about 10,000. And if I recall correctly, 8% said more than that. Now, there are only 20,000 or so murders in a typical year. And I mean, we're overrepresented, but only half of those are of Black people. So there's a substantial number of people that think there are more police shootings than there are murders, or roughly as many police shootings of unarmed Black men alone than there are murders. So I think that getting back to Sarah's point, I think that that's really common across a whole range of verticals. And it explains a lot of the bullshit that we see, bluntly. So if you actually look at racism, the United States is one of the least racist countries in the world. I don't think that's an exaggeration, just to spell that out at that level. Support for interracial marriage right now among at least whites, Blacks, and Asians is at 94%. The rate of interracial marriages is at 25%, with all those groups contributing about proportionately. So we feel that there's this conflict going on when in fact most people have a spouse or a close friend of a different ethnic background. So I don't think that makes a lot of sense necessarily, but it is sort of something that's going on right now, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you blame any one person or any group, or is it like a combination of things, including social media? Like, would you go so far as to say this kind of rise of humanities, social sciences, kind of, younger generation of academics coming up and weaponizing this stuff and turning it into careers for themselves? Like, how much of the blame should we lay at their feet?
Well, quite a bit of it. I mean, so when you look at that, so the question is, could you rephrase that actually? Sorry.
Yeah, whose fault is this? Who do we blame? Like, if we want to just, point the finger at some person or group in particular, like, do we blame like every African studies department? Do we blame the feminists? Do we blame like the people trying to get, who have to sort of come up with academic disciplines for themselves, so they just go digging deeper and deeper into grievance studies?
Well, I think we can blame all of those people. But I mean, so the two things you mentioned, one, social media obviously plays a really big role. Social media, actually, I agree with Haidt on this, that a big
Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt. A big part of the social panic that we're seeing right now is just, I think, what he calls the heuristic of full availability or something like that. You can now see everything that happens in the world at your desk. And I don't think that's something that humans were supposed to be able to do.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that when you look at stuff like the declining rate of actual sex for young women or of actual sort of violence play, football or boxing for young men, I wouldn't be surprised to find that that's tied into exposure to the most kind of extreme variants of that stuff from around the world. Like, oh, that's what it looks like. Not for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's very different from what actually sleeping with your high school love or actually jumping over one tackler or something would look like in your mind if you only had the mental images from the world that you live in.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like people joke about that to some extent, like down and to the right syndrome in the TV business, where you don't just see George Floyd dying in conflict with the cops once, you see it 400 times. Like, let's move the angle here. Yeah. This is the CNN video of the trial. Now here's the critical Fox video of the trial. And it's easy to forget through all that George Floyd only died once. Mm-hmm. And that may have been caused by a drug overdose. Just like it's easy to forget that extreme pornography doesn't look anything like normal sex, that brutal conflict in Mogadishu doesn't look anything like what you should be doing with a gun, training with your dad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think social media plays a big role here. The role of the academics, I think, is coming up with a quack theory to explain the images that make people panicked. I mean, sort of like the reason you're seeing all this is that the patriarchy never really left its position of power, but simply retrenched. And yeah, I think almost all that stuff is empirically nonsensical. The feminist argument is less nonsensical than the critical racial argument, in fact.
Oh, that's so nice of you. That's very magnanimous toward the feminists.
No,
they've actually been.
There actually is a fair amount of sexism. I don't think you face as much racism as a Black or Asian businessman, really, in most contexts.
So, I mean, it's amazing the way that the progressive academics have been colluding with the worst sort of capitalistic forces of social media and televised media to create like a total distortion. It's sort of a mass cognitive distortion, and they're really two sides of the same coin.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. I mean, that is correct. One thing that's, I think, you could get into a whole conversation here about morality and what is an ethical way to behave. I think that contemporary empathy-based morality is contemptible, actually. Mm-hmm. Like, it generally leads to solutions that make things much worse for people. Mm-hmm. So it's just garbage. It doesn't matter whether doing certain things makes you feel good.
It's not even a morality. Yeah.
We talk about this all the time.
It's
women's fault.
I think
hyper empathy.
Sort of. I mean, a lot of the people, there are two poles of that, though. A lot of the people that are exploiting and driving this, and I mean, you could even go back to the 60s with the sexual revolution. Like, when feminists started advocating it, people like Hefner were pretty quick to jump on that, right? And say, like, well, as an advocate of women's rights myself, and it's like, get out of here, pimp. Like I think that there are two angles. There are the people that are excessively empathic, and then there are the people that are just openly preying on that. So, like, I think it's Mike Bailey has done a lot of writing about predatory autogynephilia among men and later just autogynephilia.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that strikes me as a decent methodologist as an obvious description of probably 70 to 80% of quote unquote trans women.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the idea, well, of course, if people are mentally ill and they'll commit suicide unless we let them into these facilities that don't matter very much, they're all gay anyway. Of course, if that's the case, we should do this. And then that's part of it. But on the other hand, you have the actual people that are going to brutally exploit the empathic people and take power from them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why empathy-based morality, pacifism, so on have never survived for more than a few decades anywhere. And there are actually case studies of that in political science, like Angkor Wat. So, I mean, I don't even know how I got onto this thread, but that needs to be stopped immediately. We need cold, callous cruelty among leaders.
Interesting way to put it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, people prefer other words, I'm sure.
No, yeah. We talk about the harm of empathy, or empathy as a dominant frame of viewing the world and viewing justice, at least as insofar as it has wrecked the institutions. We talk about that quite a bit. So you've been in academia now fully for just the 8 years that you've been in Kentucky State.
Well, 8 to 9. I mean, before that, so when I got my PhD, I assume everyone that starts out with a PhD, especially if they're a competitive researcher, assumes they're going to be done in 3 to 5 years. I would say 4 years. That's why people do it. That's almost never the case. Like, that's the case if your fellowship operates all the way through. You don't get stuck with the teacher level teaching load because you want money and you're tired of ramen. Nothing happens in your family. I mean, in my case, like I said, mom got pretty ill. I ended up going back to another city, working full time. But I taught pretty much every year that I was in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
So even when I went back to Chicago, just to keep my hand in, I taught in the city colleges in Chicago, which was interesting because, I mean, it's not quite, well, it's pretty much the same as it's not the NYU, it's the NYCC system, but it's these enormous
the CUNY system. Yeah.
Yeah, CUNY, yeah. No, yeah, thanks. But it's these enormous schools that are set up all around the city. And it's a mix of kids from like genius hackers to guys who just got out of prison. I mean, your typical class that I had was about 65 kids. So there's a bit of a change from like the SIU honors program. But like, I'm from Chicago. I mean, like, I just put on a suit. Actually went to Brooks Brothers in downtown Chicago, and some of the small amount of money I had left, bought a suit during their off-season sale and wore that in like 2 sweaters pretty much the entire time I was teaching there. And I think this is 2012 or something. But I just took the train down to the one I was initially assigned to was Malcolm X College on the South Side, which would have been a lot of fun. But I did most of my coursework at Harry Truman, but I was there while I was working in the bullpen and so on. That was.
Yeah. I want to make sure we talk about like dating and mating crisis. I know you have fascinating things to say about all this, and we talk about this a lot. And Sarah has like many smart and controversial opinions. But just before we shift to that, were your students and are your students at Kentucky State now caught up in this kind of hyper progressive race discussion, or are they sort of just too busy living their lives? They're working class, they're first generation college. This is not something they bother with. Like how much of this is on their minds?
No, the second part of the question was insightful. Like, no, they're training to be country lawyers. I mean, they're cops, nurses, like they are very much. And I think this is an important thing to remember about college, like both on the right and on the heterodox center, where I get the impression that a lot of people would like to be in the woods doing wood carving as their girlfriend does her painting. But in both in both those zones, there's a lot of mockery of college. Like, you don't need that. It's a scam.
No.
And I actually think that's bullshit. Like, to become a member of the up middle class in most fields, like, you absolutely do need a college degree. I mean, like, I don't want a doctor that's trained in some sort of off-brand shamanic school in the Southern Islands off the coast. So,
you can't just watch YouTube videos? What do you mean? Come on.
Yeah,
it's very instructive.
Squirrel carcasses. I mean, like, if you actually watch some of the things people are trying as college alternatives, they're not great ideas. And a lot of those people are just going to wind up, and there's nothing wrong with this, as HVAC guys. They're going to make a similar salary to what they would have made otherwise, but I think many of them will be quite a bit less fulfilled. I would have been myself. But in general, there are obvious fields where the college you go to is going to have quite a range of opinion: medicine, law, engineering, computer sciences, really anything outside of some of the studies, even psychology. I mean, it's very, you guys, in terms of the term feminized we were talking about earlier, I think that applies, but there's certainly a whole range of different therapeutic ideas and so on. And you're never going to be a psychiatrist if you don't get that advanced degree. So college is something many people need to do. And also, I think that when we think of colleges, like, oh, they're crazy over there, college faculties are absurdly liberal. Like, I would say at K-State, we're probably 85-15, and that's actually pretty good.
Good. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, because we have all black executives, there's no one we're virtue signaling to. I was our university ombudsman for a while. And if you're in a meeting where it's just 20 black guys in suits and you're behind on a bill to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there's no way to blame the white man.
Yeah.
You just have to, we're going to figure out, we're going to draw in something from this stream of money and we're going to pay it. So I think because of that, K-State is actually, like, they're very cool with me from everything I've seen. It's an enjoyable place to teach. So shout to the HBCUs in general. There's some very woke ones, but a lot of them are actually, Fisk apparently is along similar lines. But
yeah.
I think that leads into my core point here, though, which is we think of college in terms very often of like 15 bespoke elite schools that not that many people go to, like Bowdoin and Oberlin and the Claremont colleges and so on, where you see people marching around with spiked up purple hair,
not spiked,
chanting and
not
throwing.
Anymore. Come on.
That's older.
They have stuff. Yeah, they've got spikes in there. They got piercings, though. They've got other things spiked. But yeah, we get the idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so I think that's what, like, the people that were throwing fire bombs at Ben Shapiro. That I think is the image many people on the coasts and around the Great Lakes have of college. I guess my point would just be, if you go to any of the SEC schools, for example, where 100,000 people go watch football games every weekend, not ideal either, but fun. You go to most of the HBCUs, you go to any of the community colleges, any of the 12 military schools we have in our hardly peaceful land, just on and on and on, any of the A&Ms, you're really not going to see that. So most of my students are just people that want to get out of the university and get jobs and help out society, in my experience.
Interesting.
You don't think there's a trickle down effect to some degree? You don't see that happening?
No, I think that there definitely is one, just to clarify. Now, for here again, at KSU or UK, where 20% of the professors are Republicans and no one's that insane, I think that the average person just graduates. And I mean, so to some extent, this is an obvious reality. Like, one of the things that we've seen a lot of on social media recently, and a lot of people don't seem to know what this is, which I think is funny. Just as someone who went to Illinois, went to college 10 or 12 years ago. But we're seeing the sorority recruiting videos where you have 100 people doing these choreographed dance routines in front of these giant mansions, many of them clearly not entirely sober already at 11 o'clock. And I think that there are a very large number of people for whom that would be the primary college experience. Like, you get a B+ business degree, you meet your husband, who's, a Pike, a Phi Kappa Alpha, and you go on and you live your life. And if you go to any of the schools I described, I think I just named 3, throw in, anything from the Citadel to Texas A&M, that's going to be a huge representative chunk of the college experience. Now, where you do have extremely radical faculty members, right now about 18% of faculty members in the social sciences identify as Marxists. And where you have a climate that's conducive to letting them influence students, which we absolutely don't, you see pretty substantial effects. I mean, there actually are a couple of studies that have measured the impact of just going to college on your political ideology. And for at least the next 8 years, I mean, it does make you shift pretty dramatically to the left. So that is a problem.
Yeah, I think I experienced that myself a little bit. Although not that I wasn't very liberal already, but I had a couple of professors who were, I guess you would say, Marxist. They weren't like letting on exactly what they believed in, but it would just be like these kind of silly little courses about, popular music or whatever, like some silly course, but then they're sneaking in there marks, all these like I'm not joking. I mean, there was a little bit of that, but they were kind of cool. So you felt like you were being educated, and even though you really, I don't know, maybe were being, I don't know if to call it indoctrination because I don't know how much I learned, but I did come away with a vibe, of like, this is how the world is. And then I remember also some anthropology courses, in particular a cultural anthropology course that was, I came out of it thinking, oh, wow, like everything I knew about patriarchy and society and the way that humanity really is was all wrong. And then after leaving college, in the years following, just doing some reading, encountering Steven Pinker and reading the Blank Slate, and then slowly, unraveling that narrative myself, it took a long time, and a lot of people just simply wouldn't have done that, and I think they would have come out of it thinking, wow, if it wasn't for capitalism, humans would be super peaceful. Like we wouldn't have any of the problems that we have.
Right.
So I think it's hard to talk about it because I think you're right that there is a focus on this like very elite group of very elite colleges and the kind of crazy shenanigans that their students get up to. But there is sort of a shift that college, I don't know. Maybe it's a seed. I don't know. Maybe it worked on me and it wouldn't work on other people. But how did you feel about it, Megan? Do you feel like you came out more of a lib after post college?
It wasn't. Yeah, about some things. I just mostly came out a huge snob. I mean, it was mostly like cultural snobbery. I mean, my parents were fairly liberal, so and it wasn't like anything dramatic. I mean, at that time, everyone just hated George H.W. Bush, and was upset about the war and stuff like that. They didn't like Republicans, but it wasn't. It didn't have the punch that we see today. Well, okay, and speaking of the patriarchy, and maybe this also folds into your book. You wrote a book called Taboo: 10 Facts You Can't Talk About, and I know there's a lot of stuff in there pertaining to the patriarchy, however defined, and things about women getting ahead. But more recently, you've been tweeting fairly consistently about the dating crisis, the mating crisis, what we're all doing wrong. Is there a masculinity crisis? Why is nobody having sex? I mean, you mentioned a little bit ago, women not having sex, but men are like really not having sex. So what the hell is going on?
Well, I mean, it just empirically what's going on is that young people aren't dating or mating. So, I mean, I read recently in one of the data sets I have that 45% of men roughly haven't approached a woman ever. I mean, for 25% of them, for 25 percentage points, it was ever in their life, offline at least. And for the rest, it was sort of, you may have, but this was a year or more back, and you're not going to describe this in the qualitative portion of the study. And you keep finding stuff like this. Only 30% of high school seniors have ever had sex. Only 21%. Yeah, 30. Now, that was during the COVID year. It was down from 39, but it's like well under half. And that's only seniors. It was someone who wanted kind of a good size, kind of non-creepy sample of young adults. It was kids that were 17 to 19 that were about to go to college. And it was 30 or 39% had ever had sex. 21% are in a love relationship, defined as like a committed, steady relationship that's sexual in any of the 3 or 4 major ways. What most people in any of our past generations would just have thought of as going out in high school, probably.
Right.
So it's pretty notable. And it has a lot of effects. Like every so often I'll see girl boss friends of mine, very often in the literal sense, say things like, yeah, we just don't need these bum ass men anymore. And then you look at like the percentage of young liberal women that are diagnosed with severe depression or another mental diagnosis is 56%. If you break out whites, it seems to be a little under 80%. So, I mean, it's obviously not working. And so the question is, what's going on? And my personal opinion is that a lot of the advice from the advice givers, whether that's any of the later waves of feminism, the men's rights response, so on, is almost absurdly bad. Like, I've seen both the feminists and the MRAs explain in great detail why you shouldn't please your partner.
Oh, they should get married. I want all of them to get married.
They're horrible, sexless marriages that end.
No, they should. It to be a huge hate. You know what? Yes.
Well, I guess that's true.
Hate fuck.
They can build up tension. But I mean, so like a lot of this, like and you see this in those online debate spaces that are very atypical. Like, you know, working class kids in Chicago, when I've looked, are still having sex and enjoying it. And kids meaning like 18. But when you look at Twitter or Reddit, there are these comments that I think really do illustrate what a lot of the problem is. Like, is it abusive if my lover expects me to sleep with them? Or like, is it unreasonable for me to expect my man to have a job? Just this sort of stuff, like the idea. And for the first one, all of these women were saying like, yes, no one should ever have any expectations on you, queen. And for the second one, all these men were like, well, what makes you think I exist to pay a bit? And it was just like you were like, these people should get together. It's just, obviously, in every healthy relationship, in every study ever done, including me being in healthy relationships, people do have normal financial, social, sexual, personal expectations. This is a given. In fact, most of those things, like a partner refusing to work or to sleep with you, were grounds for fault divorce in every society ever, including all of the few matriarchies. So it seems to me that we're teaching people all of this stupid shit that's designed almost to make them non-functional. Like, you should not be hardworking, socially polite for the gentleman, sexually pleasing. Yeah. You should be all about yourself, and you should expect someone to focus on you constantly. And I'm a nice guy, but I'm kind of an asshole. And if someone actually presented that to me, I'd be like, why? What would be the appeal of me going really, really hard for you and you doing nothing while you sit in my house? What on earth would ever?
If that's your kink, there might be a small community for that.
Masochism. Well, yeah. I do actually think that a large number of people, especially women, do have masochistic tendencies. And when you see some of this stuff, like the protests where everyone seems to have their own like zip down the back Handmaid's Tale outfit, or the insistence.
Oh yeah, that, like, there's some weird fetish thing going on. Like it's
I mean, obviously they do.
They're ready to get in those outfits. That's they're waiting for an opportunity.
I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, there've been a lot of situations. Like, one of the first slut walks ever was held in Chicago, and some of my friends went there just to check it out. These were all men. These were all trading floor type dudes, and their descriptions of it were hilarious. Like, they came face to face with all these angry feminists that were screaming about how evil men were and how their bodies belonged to them alone. And like every one of them ended up sleeping with one of the people that was on the other side.
Oh, no.
There's just like this buildup of tension and irritation and the absence of healthy normalcy. You see the same thing, by the way, with Race for Dinner, where all of these people that are in the classic demographic for masochism, like upper middle class, mostly female, white, et cetera, it's a psychological profile, but are sitting there while like these 5'11" Black and East Indian women scream at them wearing $1,000 dresses. I mean, it's there's a lot you could say about it. I don't, this is a bit of a sideline, but anyway, young people aren't mating.
Yeah, no, the masochism. So just to be clear, you're talking about Race to Dinner, the Syra Rao and Regina Jackson.
But I don't know if Syra is 5'11".
I think you mean 4'11". Did you mean 4'11"? 5'11" would be intimidating, but yeah. White women, they want
that I looked up is wrong. That it's the same thing, whatever the setup is. It's I think I have a theory about it.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there. This kind of this sort of it's a sort of like version of a rape fantasy or something. I mean, because nobody is having any sort of three-dimensional physical world experience. They're having these fantasies that are then getting entangled up in politics and some kind of cultural or political grievance. Anyway, there's a lot there. It's a kind of a big stew.
But no one's talking about these expectations though. Who's gonna tell you? Like no one. I don't think until really just a few years ago, like a few years into my relationship with my husband, did I fully recognize how extensively different male sexual needs are. I really didn't know, and no one told me. Like no one who is going to say anything. Everyone says women have the same needs as men. Actually, women just need to be we just need to be released from societal expectations. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm a woman who doesn't tell, society doesn't tell me what to do. I'm very free and girl bossy. So my sexual desire is basically the same as the man's. And actually, I don't it really isn't. It's not that high. It's not, the need is not that strong.
So nobody told you. See, this is so fascinating.
Like,
literally
this is who?
Because I feel like I got that message when I was growing up.
Like your boyfriend or husband should not abusively tell you. And I think all of the guys in my circle kind of do. And I think there's a split between the guys that are in healthy sexual relationships and that aren't, in terms of just willingness to say, like, hey, I'm really unhappy with this and am going to leave unless we can work out X at the margins, or what's something I can do for you.
Yeah.
So there are people that, to some extent, I think that for one group of people, and I know I'm overusing these words, but it really is like middle to upper middle class, especially white people that have been indoctrinated with a certain set of theories. It really is hard to break away from this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I know people that are in, the term that comes to mind is like brain parasitized zones with this stuff, where they actually would think telling their girlfriend, like, hey, I'm not happy sexually, and I don't think you're all that thrilled about my current job, let's step this up a little, would be abusive or something along those lines. And then I think you have the other 80% of America and 99% of the world that would just say, no, of course you can talk to your lover about what your needs and interests are. And
right, but it's still a step back, though. Like having to communicate all this with your new partner, and for them to think that, okay, it's not just him, it's not just her. This is actually a female need or a male need. I mean, that's a different set of assumptions. And I think a lot of young people just go into the world presuming an equality in need, and then finding that that's not the case, and feeling very frustrated and angry and not able to articulate why.
No, and I think that's a good correction or a good addition. I think it's totally true. But I mean, I think, again, the root of this is false, nonsensical beliefs that people are teaching. Mm-hmm. So, like, for those in the audience, and I'm sure you guys have said this many times, but men and women are extraordinarily different. So, like, there are studies that look at the number of words men and women say in a day. So if you're talking about, like, what are some things guys do? When I'm in a relationship with someone I like, I talk about 10 times as much as I want to. I'm not directly comparing that to any of the financial or sexual or any of the longer term marriage stuff, but, like, I'm a fairly polite person. I'm definitely not going to tell my partner to shut up or something like that, like I would with my buddies. So you end up listening to all of this stuff, and a lot of it's fascinating. My current partner is a gardener. So she's talking about she's got all these tropical plants right now, and they're lovely. She's doing a good job with them, but will they survive outside of Kentucky? It's an interesting question. How does this get into evolution? Surely these plants used to live further north than they do now. And, like, as a guy, you very often do get into the, like, well, yeah, I agree. I'm more than willing to help you out there. I've got a shovel. And so, like, when you talk about meeting someone's needs, as a man, you're never going to respond to that by being as harsh or hostile as you would with your boys. Like, bro, shut the fuck up. You're just generally going to deal with it. And it's the same thing with the sexuality. Couples work that out. Like, hey, you're going to give me a massage first? And you just move on with your relationship. The advice I would give there is that both of you should try as hard to please each other or to do things that benefit each other as possible. So I would assume if a guy's very interested in sex, but isn't willing to engage in conversation or do the massage or a number of other things, can't cook, is broke every day and is not trying to change that, like, all of those things would probably impact how enjoyable your sex life is. And humans dislike saying that because it sounds transactional or competitive, but there's kind of a that's life element.
Yeah.
The way I would put it to young people that are unwilling to just accept predatory reality is, no, it's perfectly ethical. The happier you make someone, the happier they'll make you. And there's no real reason just not to leave it there.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it, that there's a shying away, but I think that's also why it becomes so awkward in relationships, because you don't want to say things in this way and turn this loving relationship into a transaction. And it's better that your mom says it. You know what I mean? It's better that your sister tells you, because she's in it for a different, like, she's having that conversation with you as an outsider, as an objective person who cares about you.
You mean telling you to get a job, not to have more or less sex? What do you mean exactly?
Well, either. Like, I mean, what I would tell my sister and what I would tell my brother in terms of how they should be pleasing their partners and how, what does a girl want and what does a guy want? You know what I mean? I would cater that conversation, but with their interests, with the interests of my siblings at heart. And so I think that's an easier conversation to have outside of the actual romantic relationship. But I hear what you're saying, that's kind of the position we're in. That's where we are. We are at a position where we have to be able to have these conversations.
I understand that after you have these conversations, you might not go to a pleasant dinner that night, but I don't have a problem with just telling your partner this stuff. And I think, so yeah, I suppose at some level you're right, that if your best female or male friends explained all this stuff to you, and I don't mean to be glib or crude, but like it was male friends of mine that explained what a clitoris was when I was like 15. Like, you young guys don't know what you're doing, and this is the thing. Women are different from men. It doesn't work the same way for them. They don't always come, no offense. This is how that happens. So yeah, if your friends, your older brother, your father, for me, could explain that's great. That probably is a little better. But I think just your wife saying, sex is pretty good, but this would make it better. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Mm-hmm. The other option would just be it continuing to suck. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, first of all, I don't think ultimate morals are real at all. I mean, I think humans are a predatory ape species. We have a sense of empathy. We have a sense of logic, and we make up rules from that. And in the absence of those, frankly, made up rules don't exist. If I was walking down the Appalachian Trail and I saw a mountain lion, I couldn't tell the mountain lion, don't attack me, brother, because that would be wrong. I'm a living being. I won't be objectified and used as food. I mean, that's not logical. All those ideas relate to things that humans made up among ourselves. But to the extent that morality does mean anything, it essentially means improving the world, helping other people. So if you say the reason I'm doing this thing that's going to make you miserable, and this actually, to me, would apply to some of the Christian and Muslim regulations on sex or on the treatment of women or on how partners treat each other. If you say I'm doing this thing that's bad because it's good, putting this a bit crudely, I don't think that makes a lot of sense at all. The good is the thing that improves. The only coherent definition of good that I would really advance is making things better, fighting entropy.
Well, isn't there like a proximate good and proximate bad versus ultimate good? And I mean, that's the religious understanding, right? Like you do this one thing that's hard, or we force you to do this one thing that's hard and feels bad so that you can more easily have or encounter a bigger good, a more important good. With an example being, yeah, you sacrifice yourself in the short term and get a job. You don't love it, but you do it so that you can have this, better good of a healthy relationship and a happy wife.
Yeah, no, I think that's calculable though. I mean, so again, like my opinion is just we made all this stuff up, but I actually wrote an entire sort of essay about this that's gotten a good reception when people at philosophy journals and so on have looked at it. It's not a thing I do. I've never really submitted it, published it. But I mean, I wrote down kind of my entire moral philosophy, and my conclusion was that the goal of life is kind of achieving the greatest short-term and long-term quantum of total happiness. So like, if you accept that there is no ultimate right or wrong, there are 12 or 14 things the anthropologists say a sane person would not do. And I've actually read the list, and I'm pretty much 100% with it. Child sexual abuse, eating people, and so on. But I mean, if there's nothing that's going to send you to heaven or hell or Abaddon, the idea that the goal of life is being conventionally good changes. And so does the primary rebel idea, which is that the goal of life is being sort of naughty. So, for example, the Church of Satan is a crude, childlike parody of the Christian church, at least in its theistic form. So neither of those matters. None of that's real. The question is, in the context of actual logic and empathy and so forth, what do you want to do in life? And the best answer I've heard to that is Aristotle, achieve happiness and eudaimonia, sort of honorable pleasure, because that's the thing for which all other things are done, whether that's short or long term. So there's a badly drawn mathematical proof in the essay, but the basic argument is your goal should be the greatest possible short and long-term quantum of reasonably honorable happiness. You can debate each of those words, but the reason you would do the hard thing, like you would have a job, as the example was used, is because that enables you to do other things that are beneficial. Like, for example, having a wife in practice, having money, buying a home, being able to put your kids in it. So you do face X amount of negativity as a result of that, but you also get Y amount of positivity. And that's pretty measurable. I mean, there are many studies that look at the level of happiness of employed versus unemployed people and so on. So I guess that would be my crude philosophical take there.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't want to derail this conversation into like one that picks apart, like,
yeah,
and gets into that. But I love it. Thank you for
this is Sarah's wheelhouse. You guys will have to get together privately. So, who do you like among the sort of masculinity influencers, or the guys who are sort of trying to help young men? I mean, we have Jordan Peterson. We have all the way to Andrew Tate, and I was talking to Tara Henley recently on my podcast, and she was quoting somebody who I now cannot remember, but so I will not take credit for this, and I think she was quoting someone else. But he said, everybody criticized Jordan Peterson, or the left refused to take Jordan Peterson seriously, and so we've ended up with Andrew Tate. What do you think of that analysis?
I think there's some truth to that. I think that the problem is more that the left refused to take the deeper issue that Peterson was trying to deal with seriously. Peterson himself is a guy I like, but I mean, I don't necessarily think if you see a Canadian psychologist wearing a Riddler-style Brooks Brothers suit and engaging in a debate with a feminist writer, you necessarily have to say, well, that's the guy I'm going to settle on. Although, again, I like JP. But my take on this would be, first of all, I once asked a friend of mine who's much, much more religious than I am, but like, who's the masculinity, pretty much what you said, who's the masculine role model you would provide to boys? And he said, Jesus. And I mean, he then went on with like 5 or 6 others. Like, well, I mean, I don't know about Jesus either, but like,
yeah.
But, there were a bunch of others. Like,
I mean, he didn't get married.
Not that I dislike the guy, but
but I mean, like,
no shade on Jesus, but
but we all love Big J. But I mean, he went through like 5 or 6 others, like Captain America, Robin Hood.
Those are all very different.
No, these are all outliers. These are not. No, I think the opposite.
Well, I mean, I think that those are like Robin Hood. I think those are great. Like, I think the point though is that if you want to inspire boys, I mean, the reality is that for most of history, we devoted 90+% of the human written tradition to men. So there are dozens of stories. I mean, the washing of the spears, the war between the Zulu and the British is something I would read with like a young male mentee and have. There are a ton of things you could use. Zulu, the movie, is about the same thing. There are a ton of examples you could use with a young man as avatar examples of healthy masculinity. I guess that's really the point. Like, in terms of professional masculinity, like, I'm a guy, I'm a pretty normal man. I always seem to learn well when I teach them. But among professional masculinity influencers, what do I think? I think Jordan Peterson's advice is basically good. He's a highly qualified psych guy. He's intentionally keeping it simple, clean your room. It literally is at the level of talk to women and get a job. So I think that's pretty productive. Yeah. The Andrew Tate stuff, it depends what your goals are. He gives pretty decent advice on how to become a pimp, actually.
Yeah, so if that's what you're into, okay, that's
if
he's niching down, as they say.
Is he even giving actionable advice though? It always feels to me that he's kind of like, as a young person watching him, and it's what's amazing about Andrew Tate's followers is that they're like 10, they're actually really young boys that are watching Andrew Tate. Is that I think that it's a fantasy that they're living through, that they are him, not so much something that they're trying to achieve in their real life. And maybe they know for a fact that they can't, but that they can kind of, it's almost like a Mary Sue sort of phenomena. Do you know what I mean? Like from a fandom perspective, where you step into your shoes and you pretend like you are some guy like Andrew Tate, and isn't that great? Wouldn't that be great? That's how I have interpreted him, as something you can't even be and you don't even want to be, but it's a fantasy for like an 11-year-old boy, like a very disempowered, like pimply little kid who's like super horny now and doesn't know what to think. And so he needs this like very simple,
well, maybe a 14-year-old. I don't know about 11-year-old.
They're really young. It's sick. It's sick how like how much of his fandom is like extremely
Well, in terms of my take on that, first of all, I think that's correct. I also think that's true for almost everything, especially everything unhealthy. So there are two examples that come to mind. Like I know Steve Salerno, the author of the book Sham, which is about the self-help movement. And I remember once, it's a great book, Sham, the self-help and actualization movement. But I remember once talking to Steve about who bought self-help books. Was like, is it very driven, like business women? Like, do they follow the diet and just do it once? And he was like, hell no. The whole point of these self-help publishers is that they're 20 related titles, like the carnivore diet, the vegan diet, the omnivore diet, the hippopotamus diet, whatever. And the most likely customer for any of these books is someone that bought another related book and basically failed with that system within the past year. So, I mean, the average, like perfectly nice, but mildly chubby, regular income wife who's purchasing a $40 hardcover diet book is also dreaming, is fantasizing. And even as you go a little darker, I mean, that's the case. Like, I remember I mentioned like Hefner and that genre of like when porn started earlier in the conversation. Someone I knew, I think this was a law school classmate or something, I forget who the guy was, but was talking about working with one of the porn companies. I think it was one that owned Hustler on an account like years ago. And he mentioned that the clientele for porn was almost entirely losers. Not like looking at porn occasionally, not like watching with your girlfriend, but like if you have a subscription to a porn magazine, you are not a sophisticate that is trying to learn tips from Hugh about how to be even better with women. You're someone that rarely encounters women, and you're basically checking out the images. I assume that's true online now as well. But it's the same thing with Andrew Tate. Yeah, like if you actually are either just very successful with women or you're an actual player, yeah, you wouldn't purchase something called the Pimp and Hose degree for $900. Yeah, I'd say that's what it's called. I mean, so yeah, another like last thing, but Andrew Tate also strikes me as a giant nerd. Like I'm kind of nerdy myself, whatever. But I mean, like if he went to my high school, I think he would have been teased a lot.
He's an
Like,
awkward
kind of
guy. There's something odd about him.
Yeah,
like it's as if it is put on. Even he puts it on.
He doesn't own it. He's
character.
not comfortable in his skin.
Yeah. His brother is even worse. Like his brother is like a LARP. Like Andrew Tate is LARPing, and his brother is LARPing as Andrew Tate. You know, like
right. Yes, it's LARPing twice removed. Yes.
But I don't think it's actually all that hard to figure out what it is. I mean, Tate is a walky, angular, biracial kid from a working class background. Father wasn't there. I'm not trying to play pop psychologist. And he says intelligent things from time to time. But I mean, like going bald, this is true for a lot of influencers in that space, by the way. I mean, where you see guys wear hats all the time and so on. Hypothetically. But I mean, like, it's not hard to see why there'd be some insecurities there. I mean, like, I don't know, if I was in a roast session with my buddies, I could probably be made to feel insecure about being chubby or a dozen other things. So that comes out. And that doesn't mean that Tate hasn't done most of the things he boasts about. But it's also worth remembering that actually pimping, as versus dating, like, and just an accomplished woman you like, isn't all that hard. I mean, his actual technique is that he's approaching 15 and 17-year-old girls in a third world country and asking them to come to his party mansion.
Yeah.
Like anyone who's ever thrown a rave could do that if they were willing to sink that low. It's just, that's what you actually do. It's not a bunch of lawyers over there partying with him.
Yeah. He's not getting difficult to attain women either. He's like putting himself in the most powerful position possible and getting like the easiest, lowest hanging fruit possible. And it works. And I think, I find it very symbolic, the move from somebody like Jordan Peterson to Andrew Tate, in that I see Jordan Peterson as like, responsible patriarch, or like someone who advises that young men become that, or get themselves into a foundation that they can step into that role of, this dutiful, man. But Andrew Tate, I mean, he's not a father. He doesn't orient his relationships to others as part of who he is at all. In fact, he just, how can I use others? How can I use women? It's like a adolescent boy, like it's sick in a way. It's like stunted.
Yeah.
Well, I think stunted is good. So like, again, I don't I don't think conventional morality is real. So I don't think things like having dark fantasies or wanting to hurt enemies or use people you don't like are unusual, certainly.
No.
Whether they're bad is debatable. Like, my personal position on actual opponents is fuck them, who cares? But stunted is a good description because that is very unlikely to bring you happiness. Like, I think there's this image when people look at something like the guy who lives in a mansion with a bunch of prostitutes, there's a temptation to look at the highest possible end of that and say, this guy must feel like a king every day. Like, to assume that all these women are as beautiful as the marketing photos Tate shared from time to time, and that every day is free of controversy and so on. And the actual reality is that, again, the average age of these people is 17 or 18 by this point. Conflict was apparently constant in the place. He lives with 5 or 6 other dudes. Has to deal with the minutia of managing a heterosexual cam girl business as a guy, which to me sounds like a disgusting and annoying job that I would not want to leave my office and my state of models for, let's say. So, like, when you actually look at that, there's a reason that the things that are considered bad are considered bad. And that's usually because they produce negative outcomes that you don't want. Like, you're on child support for 10 women and the Romanian police, who are no joke, are kicking in your door. So that's the reality of that. Like, when you actually look under the fantasy, like, if you watch some of Tate's videos you see the reality of what the BDSM fantasies many people have would actually look like. And a lot of that stuff kind of looks like it sucks. So yeah, stunted, limited is a good way to put that.
Yeah. Well, we've been going a while and we could talk forever, but just before we wrap up, what's like the thing you really want to say? What are you thinking about the most these days? What do you think of this particular moment that we're in vis-a-vis anything?
Well, I was actually asked by a Spanish language show very recently, what's one thing you'd like to say in my beautiful language, La Lengua de Cervantes? And my actual response is sort of a joke, was Donde está el dinero? Like, buy my book and a couple pitches. But in this case, I don't think I'm going to say that. I think that the one thing I would encourage kind of young heterodox people to do is just remember that there really is kind of a human faculty of logic. Like, I've said this, this will probably be my next essay. I've said this a couple times recently, but this is the thing that enables you to sit on a jury and critique a professional prosecutor. It's the thing that enables you to write an op-ed for a newspaper with the circulation of 1 million in Chicago or LA, get that published, receive plaudits on that. It's why anyone who's a solid writer could submit to an interdisciplinary journal in the social sciences. You just have to show you know what you're doing. And I would encourage people to apply that logic to the world around them. Like, when we're talking about these questions, I've really enjoyed coming on, bantering with you guys. Hopefully I haven't sounded completely stupid. But when we're talking about these questions, like, does it help in a relationship that you like sleeping with your partner and have money? I mean, you don't want to be crude, but obviously there is a tool inside your brain that helps you decide whether that's true or not. And that same tool can help you decide whether, for example, a 6'2" autogynephile is a woman. So I would encourage people to use that ability, certainly the people that would be in the audience for you guys or for me, because you're almost always going to be correct. And if what you find is that people are in lockstep defending something that's not only debatable, but idiotic, obviously false, the question isn't, am I insane? It's, why is everyone doing this? They're not all crazy. What's the motivation? Is it financial, social? Is it fear? And I think that opens up an interesting set of questions. So that's my piece of advice. Understand that logic hasn't vanished and you can use it.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. People should know to buy your book. Where can they find you? Where's the best place to track you down and track your work down?
I'm pretty findable these days to a disturbing extent. I had to take some of my house images off the internet and so on the past couple of days. But the best way to just search my general background is Wilfred Reilly. It's WILFRED REILLY on Google or any similar rival search engine. And if you do that, you'll find my Twitter, which has 120 or so thousand followers. You'll find all my other social media, Facebook and YouTube. You'll find my Shorty website, which is really an extension of the university website. And my books themselves, which are being sold on Amazon, Goodreads, and the like. So I encourage you to reach out and get in touch.
All right. Well, I've really enjoyed your work out there and following you and hearing you. So it's been a treat to have you on. So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to you guys for having me.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Hi, it's Megan, just popping in here to let you know that my other podcast, The Unspeakable, the one I do without Sarah, is now available on video as well as audio and has its own YouTube channel, The Unspeakable with Megan Down. There you'll find not only an extensive back catalog of audio interviews I've done with guests like Sam Harris, John McWhorter, Jonathan Haidt, Nadine Strawson, Maria Bamford, and many, many, many others, but all of the weekly episodes on video going forward. And if you're a paying Substack subscriber, because I know you don't have enough Substacks to subscribe to, you get 2 bonus episodes every month just for you. So if you like this channel, I'd love it if you went over and liked and subscribed to The Unspeakable. It's just like A Special Place in Hell, except without Sarah. And how could you pass that up? Hope to see you there.